Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Al-Fadi, and we are doing a special live stream with Dr. Jay Smith concerning the recent developments in Afghanistan. And I've been doing a number of those briefings with other guests, but every guest will bring their own perspective. And sometimes not every guest is up to speed on certain things as well, whether past historical information or maybe current development related to this situation. So I spoke with Dr. J recently, and he kindly agreed to join me and to add more of his knowledge, and especially maybe a little bit of a history about the Taliban themselves, not to mention, of course, the implications of what is taking place at the moment. We want to thank those who are joining us right now, and I know many of you will start trickling in. But regardless of the time zone, you can always watch it later if you couldn't join us live. With that in mind, brother, thank you so much for being here with us. As always, we are blessed to have you, and we're looking forward to the wealth of knowledge that you can add to this particular topic.
Well, thank you so much, Al-Fadi. This is my part of the world. This is where I grew up. And these are the people that I spent my first 17 years with. Not in Afghanistan, I was in India, but that whole area was all one country at one time before it became independent in 1947. So there's an awful lot that we can say about this part of the world that I think also to help with the misconceptions concerning who the Taliban are, what their code of ethics is, what is the future, where did they come from, and why are they different than probably any other radical group we've come across.
Yeah. And with that in mind, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Taliban themselves? I mean, we're talking about different tribes here, but who are they? How long they've been in the area, in the region? Are they from that particular region, or did they migrate from somewhere else? And why did they call themselves the Taliban, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, the Taliban. Well, the Taliban is really a word that, as you know, in Arabic, that is from the root talibé. So they are students. But whose students? They are the students of Muhammad Omar, or Mullah Omar is what he's popularly known as. And he was living in Kandahar in 1994 and was absolutely incensed with the civil war that was going on. Remember, the Soviets controlled Afghanistan from 1978 up until 1992. They were then thrown out, and there was a lot of enormous amount of fighting going on between the different mullahs, between the different warlords, the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, the also, and especially the Pashtuns. They are the major players in Afghanistan. They are all in the south and towards, let me see, the east for yourself. East would be over this way. So the east and southern part of Afghanistan, that is the Pashtun area. And Kandahar is their capital city. And he was there in Kandahar. He was upset with all this breakdown of not only violence, but this breakdown of structures, everything else. And so he's decided to create the Taliban. So the Taliban did not exist before 1994. He only had 50 students, 50 talibés. Not much to begin with. But with those 50, then, he started making a name for himself, started moving out of Kandahar, and started moving towards Kabul. Now, others then suddenly came up from the south. Now, hold on a minute. And let me just show you something. I don't have let me just show you this map here. I don't know if you can see this, but this is Afghanistan here, and here is Pakistan here. Can you see that? See this orange area? See this big orange blob?
Yeah.
That's the Pashtun tribe. Notice that the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan goes right through it and cuts it in half.
Mm-hmm.
This was created in 1893 by the famous, what was his name? It was called he was the one that created the line. He was a British officer there in London who was putting together the borders for the different countries at that time, including India, because India included Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh back in the 1893. And he just looked at the ridges and rivers. That's all he cared about, were ridges and rivers. And you know that Afghanistan is mostly mountainous. Without even thinking about the tribal groups or even about the ethnic areas, he just built that line right through the middle of the Pashtuns. So half of the Pashtuns are up here in Afghanistan, and the other half are here in what we call the northwestern frontier. This is Waziristan, and there's Peshawar right up there, and down here is Quetta. Those are the two main cities. But the big city for the Pashtuns would be Kandahar, right about there, and then you have Jalalabad up over here, and then you have Kabul up there. Now, what happened in 1994? He brought all these talibans from these madrasas in Pakistan. They all came across the border to join him. 15,000 of them came up to join him. And that gave him an enormous amount of body. Now, these talibans had all been, they are part of the Sunni, but very radical form of Islam that was coming out of the Tablighi Jamaat, that area. These are the groups that came out of India, and they were coming out of where I grew up. They had actually come up from North India.
Isn't it Darbandi?
The Deobandis is actually from Deoband. That's the city that I used to go through whenever I would go to see my parents. I would stop there and we'd have tea. You can see the madrasas on either side. And it was the Deobands that created the madrasas there in the north frontier, which then produced these talibans that moved up into Afghanistan to join Mumar, or let's just call him Mullah Omar. He then took over Kabul, the major city, in 1996. So from 1996, then it was just a step and a jump up to then taking over Jalalabad over to the east. He went up to Mazar-i-Sharif in the north. He went up to Herat in the west, and he had already got Kandahar. So he had the 5 major cities. Lashkar Gah would be another city. So let's say 6 cities. And that he got all those cities under his control. He then controlled all the military, and he controlled the country per se. Now, there were still pockets that were of resistance, especially amongst the Tajiks and the Uzbekis up in the north. And over in the eastern part, you have the Tajiks. Up in the northern part, you had some of the Uzbekis. Other than that, though, he controlled that whole area for 5 years. It was he then that introduced and brought in Al-Qaeda, and that's where Muhammad, you have
Osama bin Laden.
But the other guy, Ayman Zawahiri, who was the theologian that was the Egyptian who came along with Osama bin Laden, and he was one that gave the ethos to the Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden was, in some way, we look at Osama bin Laden because he was the money man. He was the one that was a playboy that had all the money, but he didn't have much theology. And so we kind of look at him as the leader. Most of the Taliban did not consider Osama bin Laden that important. It was Ayman Zawahiri, who was the theologian. He had been a medical doctor. He had studied under Sayyid Qutb. He knew he was part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and he had memorized the Quran by the time he was 15 years of age. So he was a child prodigy to begin with. And he has always been the theological head. Now, he still is, though he's pretty much too old now and he's incapacitated. He then was the one that really ran the show, though Osama bin Laden was the figurehead, and he was one that gave the money and the finances. By bringing Al-Qaeda in, the Taliban in some ways shut down and reduced their capacity, because here's the problem. The Taliban are a very proud people because of the fact that they come from the Pashtun, and they only come from that tribe. Now, the Pashtuns can be traced right back to the 1st century BC. And the Pashtuns have a code of ethics called Pashtunwali. Have you ever heard this? I don't know if you've heard this before.
In my reading about the Taliban, I came across it, yes.
Okay. And the Pashtunwali, interestingly, they have this code of ethics that is similar to Islam, but different. And the first 3 categories of Pashtunwali, number 1 is called Melmesja, which is the idea of being a good host. Whenever there's someone that comes in your country, you're a good host. So they use this Melmesja with the Al-Qaeda. And that's why the Al-Qaeda were welcomed with open arms as fellow brothers under Islam. And they were brought in, and they were, in a sense, they were rescued because they had been rejected in Sudan and rejected in Saudi Arabia. They also gave asylum. And the word that they use this is nunawatai. Nunawatai is this idea of giving asylum to the stranger. Probably the best example of this is a guy named Marcus. Have you heard this name, Marcus Luttrell, who was a SEAL, Navy SEAL soldier that they had, I think, 6 or 7 of them had been killed in an ambush by the Taliban, and they took one of the tribes of the subgroups of the Pashtuns called the Sabrai tribe, took them in and used this Nanawatai asylum for him to protect him. Even were fighting against other Talibans to protect his life. That is something that's not Islamic, and that's something that is different about the Taliban that you won't see in any other Islamic group. But then the third category, which is the most important one, is what they call badal, which is vengeance, which means that anytime you do something against me, anytime you say something, even if you do a curse against me, I will hold you responsible, and this will not be forgotten. You will not get away from this, even if it's just the whole life it takes to get them back. This revenge is there. And that is what has been coming to play with anybody that comes and takes over Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a proud nation. They have never really, the Pashtuns themselves have never, ever really been controlled. So the British could not control them. The Soviets never could control them. And neither could we, the Americans. We've never controlled the Pashtuns. We've controlled the cities, and that's all we've controlled. And that's why 80% of all Afghanis live in the rural areas, in the mountainous area where the Pashtuns control. The 20% that live in the cities were the ones who had come to the cities to get away from the Pashtun, to get away from the Taliban, especially between 1996 and 2001. And of course, you all know what happened in 2001. That's when 9/11 came, and George Bush then sent our troops, and we just destroyed the Taliban because of our superior air power and our superior military force. But what did we do next? Well, we should have then destroyed the Taliban and gone home. That's called revenge. And the Taliban understand that, because that is badal. That is one of the 3 major categories of their code of ethics. But we didn't. We decided to do nation building, and we decided to make Afghanistan a Western enclave. And we decided that we were going to bring democracy, and we were going to bring education, and we were going to let women have freedom and equality, and we were going to bring in hospitals and schools and road building and you name it, and then destroy all the poppy fields and try to change their crops over to other type of crops without thinking through. They have been doing this for 2,000 years. This Pashtunwali predates Islam, predates Sharia law. Now, they did take on Islamic ideals. They did take on the Hanafi form of Islam, and that's true. No one suggests that that's any different. But that was always subsidiary to Pashtunwali. And there are other areas. I'm just going to think of, let me get my paper here. There are other areas of the Pashtunwali that they talked about. You have the Tura, which is bravery. You have the Wapa, which is loyalty. Zagara, which is kindness. Groh, which is faith. Now, faith, that is just a subsidiary of their major categories. And most people are saying that that's the first thing. No, it isn't. It's actually one of the lesser codes of ethics. The Pat, respect, Viar means pride. And they also have Torah or Merana, which is courage. On top of that, and these are the other major categories, they have Nang, which is honor, and Namas, which is female honor, and Hewad, which is standing up for your country. These are things that no one has really talked about because no one's bothered to look at the Taliban. What's fascinating is the Taliban controlled the countryside. They controlled the mountainous area. The United States, all they controlled were those 6 cities. Kabul. Let me just do it from your standpoint. So Kabul would be over here, and then you have Kandahar here, and then you have Lashkar over here. You have Herat over here in the west, and up at the top would be Mazar al-Sharif, and over to the east of Kabul would be Jalalabad. Jalalabad is where the IS, and that's where IS Khorasan have their headquarters. Now, what was happening is the United States controlled the cities purposely because that's all they could control. They could not control the countryside because the countryside was mountainous. And as you well know, living in Saudi Arabia and anybody that lives in the Middle East, where everything is flat, when places are flat, you can control the terrain pretty easily from the air. You can use airplanes, and most importantly, you can use drones. That you can't do in mountainous territory. And that's why planes couldn't be used. That's why helicopters had to be used. And that's why the Russians finally had to leave Afghanistan, because we supplied the Taliban with Stinger rockets that you could hold on your shoulders, and you could bring down these helicopters just from the sides of the cliffs. And that's why the Soviets could not really fight against the Taliban, because they tried to control the countryside. Americans were a little bit smarter in that they stayed in the cities and they stayed put. Here's what's the problem is, and this is what most people aren't talking about. When you look at what America has done, we've spent 20 years there, right? 2001 to 2021. We've spent $2 trillion there, right? Doing what?
Nothing.
Well, we thought we were nation building. We thought we were changing the whole thing. But what were we showing, and what was on our television, and what would all our presidents say? Look at Kabul. Look how all the hospitals we built in Kabul. Look at all the schools. Look at the women. Look at these. I mean, what's been going on and on? I've been getting all these this last 2 weeks. Look at this music school that they set up. This music school of 200 students that they finally tried to take out on a bus to the airport just yesterday to try to get them out of there. And the U.S. military refused to let them get on. I mean, just some of the stupidity things that we were involved in. It was as if we were trying to make Kabul New York. And this is why I think an awful lot of people just don't understand what's happened. In order to do that, we had to create a large army. We had to produce a large army. After 2014, we pulled back our 140,000 troops that were there, and we just kept a small skeleton group, and all they did was to train up the Taliban military, which reached to 300,000 by 2 weeks ago. Just 2 weeks ago, there were 300,000 soldiers. What happened to those 300,000 soldiers? Well, we assumed that they were going to maintain some type of stability, and they were going to retain what we had spent 20 years building up, and that they would make use of our $2 trillion that we had given them, including an enormous amount of military equipment. I've got a list here of all the military equipment that they left behind. Have you seen this? It's all over the news today. Take a look at this. I'm going to just read down some of it. 22,000 Humvees we left behind. 634 M1117. These are personnel carriers, armored personnel carriers. 155 mine-proof vehicles. 169 armored personnel carriers. 42,000 trucks and SUVs. 64,000 machine guns. 8,000 trucks. 16,000 night vision goggles. 358,000 M16 rifles, 126,000 pistols, 176 artillery pieces. But look at the aircraft we left behind. I had no idea we had this much aircraft there. 33 Mi-17. These are Russian-made large helicopters. 33 Blackhawks. Those are the ones that are used for. Those are some of the most successful helicopters in our arsenal. And then, of course, it goes on to C-130 transport planes, 4 of them, and on down. Now, all of this we left behind. We left all of this behind to help the military, the Afghan military. 300,000, the largest military in the history of the Afghani nation. I don't think there will ever be that large a military. What happened to that military? Well, between August 5th and August 15th, in 10 days, that entire 300,000 force took off their uniforms, put on Afghani dress, many of them wearing either Uzbeki or Tajik or Pashtun dress with the headdress on top, and handed their weapons to the Taliban, and basically just walked out of their bases. Bagram base, one of the largest air bases in the world, was just became a ghost town overnight. And this happened in 10 days, Al-Fadi. This happened in 10 days.
Yes. And
shocked the whole world.
We spent $10 billion, by the way, on the Bagram Air Force
the
base.
Bagram Air Base, which is just north of Kabul.
Yeah. The Bagram, we spent $10 billion building it.
Have you seen what tonight? Just look at the videos of them walking into that air base. They're walking into, and there's a Los Angeles Times reporter who is Afghani himself. That's why he's been left behind with an American accent. And he's just filming what they're looking at. They're going into hangars, and there are 4 Chinook helicopters. That's not even on this list. Yeah. Chinook helicopters, didn't even get into this list. These are huge helicopters with 2 rotating blades that can take up to upwards of 50 troops at a time. Now, that is an enormous amount of loss. But here's what no one's talking about. And that is why did the military give up without a fight? Where was there any fighting going on? Between August 5th and August 15th, there were pockets of resistance. I'm not going to, I will give you that, especially in the north, and especially in the northeast with the Tajiks. But there was no fight at Kandahar. There was no fighting at Herat. There was no fighting in Mazar-e-Sharif. There was no fighting in Jalalabad. And there was no fighting in Kabul. They just walked right into the presidential palace. Surprised everybody, including most of the populace that were on the ground. Look at the thousands upon tens of thousands of people that ran to the airports, tried to jump on those planes, tried to even hold on to the wheels. Look at the two guys that fell from the sky. You can see them on the video as they plummeted to their deaths. One of them was just a 17-year-old soccer player who was part of the junior soccer team. What in the world were they running from? This was their own people. This is their own military. This is the Taliban. These are their own Muslim warriors. These are all Muslims running away. And of course, nobody wants to ask what was going on and why is it that 300,000 soldiers gave up without a fight after being trained for 20 years with some of the best equipment in the world, and certainly plenty of it. Remember, the Taliban only have 60,000 versus 300,000. Tell me what went wrong, Al-Fadi. Do you know the answer? I know the answer, but I like to see what the press is going to say. I like to see what Biden's going to say. I'd like to see what the American generals are going to say, because this is an enormous embarrassment against America. This is, listen, I'm an American. You're an American. This is a huge embarrassment against us and who we are and what we stand for.
Not only that, we have one of our viewers here lost a cousin back in 2012 in Afghanistan. What a loss. Indeed, what a loss. Look at the 10 Marines that were lost. Look at the Navy person that was lost. Look at the Army. My son served in the Marine, and I look at this and I say, are you kidding me? These lives were lost for nothing?
2,400 American soldiers lost their lives. 13 in just on Thursday itself. Now, ironically, who else was amongst those that were wounded at that blast on Thursday? 3 of them were Taliban soldiers. Are you starting to see what's going on here? And this is what people don't want to talk about.
We're going to see a cocktail party taking place over there.
It's already happening. Look at all the shots they're flying in the air as soon as the C-130, the C-17 took off and took the last soldiers off. They were shooting into the air. I mean, Biden couldn't get out fast enough. The military got out even a day early. They were even a day earlier, and they've left 6,000 Americans behind that still want to get out, who cannot get out. And they're saying, well, we'll get them out sooner or later. We'll get them out through diplomatic means. You know, I mean, to me, I've never seen such an embarrassing retreat. This is a terrible retreat. And where was Biden? And where was what was his Blinken? What is his name? The Secretary of State.
I think Blinken.
Where was Blinken and Biden on the day that Kabul fell? You know where they were?
Vacation.
Biden was at Camp David. Blinken was up in the Hamptons. That's entire right. White House had gone on vacation, and they were seeing all these cities fall. For 10 days, they were watching one city after another fall, and they went on vacation. Did no one tell them this was happening? Did no one inform them that actually the Taliban were on the outskirts of Kabul on the 15th of August, and they just walked right into the penalty? I mean, what has happened to our politicians? What has happened to our military when we were caught basically with our pants down? And this is an enormous failure on our part. And I think that a lot of it has to be placed right onto the laps of the military and of our politicians for not understanding who indeed are the Taliban and what is their purpose and who are the ones who control the people in the rural areas, and who are these 300,000 made up of? Because that I don't hear coming out. One other thing we need to talk about: who has been left behind? What one group has been left behind, and whose embassy is still open, and none of their people have fled. Things we can talk about, because I want to get it back to you before we go on any further.
Well, I mean, you kind of summed it up in a beautiful way, which is we lack understanding of the people that we were dealing with. I mean, I look at the Taliban, brother, and I say to myself, are you telling me these people will have diplomatic, basically, relationships? They're going to know finances. They are going to sign an agreement about the environment and, all that kind of stuff. I mean, these are mountainous people. All they know is living in mountains. So I have no idea really what's going on. And I feel disappointed that we even left them that much equipment, because you know what they're going to do? They're going to be selling it left and right and making all kind of money off of it.
Yeah. I think one of the things, I was on a show in Nigeria on Sunday morning, and I put that up on my site. And the fellow who was interviewing me on that show, Korede, kept on the same refrain. They're going to take over the world. Afghanistan is going to become a hotbed of instability, and it's going to be a hotbed of radicalism. And I kept on warning him and saying, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful. Where do you get your information that they're going to take over the world? And how do you think they're going to take over the world from Afghanistan? What exactly do they have to take over the world? This is going to take over the world? No, it's not. You can't take over the world with these kind of weapons. These kind of weapons need spare parts. These kind of weapons break down. These kind of weapons needs all kinds of bullets and armor. Where's that going to come from? And that's why most people are not thinking through what really is going to happen in the future. Secondly, what you just brought up, who's going to run all these offices? Who's going to run all these public services? Who even in amongst the Taliban understands how to run any of this engineering? Who are the engineers going to come from now? And here is the biggest problem. What about feeding their people? Upwards of 70% of all the Afghanis have been fed by NGOs in the last 2 years, because the last 2 years have gone, Afghanistan has gone through some of the worst famines they've had. And in the last 2 years, almost all the crops have failed. The only reason the Afghanis have survived are because NGOs coming in from Europe primarily and America have fed them. All of those NGOs and all of those experts and all of the administrators of all of that food has left in the last 2 weeks. None of them have remained. And where in the world the Taliban going to be able to do what those NGOs did? They don't have the wherewithal, they don't have the means, they don't have the expertise, and they don't have the relationships with all the other, certainly the other companies, especially, who bring in all that food stuff, much of it from overseas. To say nothing of the fact that the famine is still continuing. And we're looking, I think, at a humanitarian crisis. But the tragedy of all this is most Americans, and I would suggest most Europeans, just don't care. Because the only reason we went in there was for revenge. Am I correct?
Exactly. I mean, to me, if what we were doing was to go after bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, okay, mission accomplished the first 2 weeks, literally. That's it. Okay. You went, you destroyed their basically unity, and you proved to them that we are superior, and then you start to collect intelligence, laid out bin Laden. I mean, but why stay there? The problem is that we go to places that we have no clue. What is the culture about? Which people are we dealing with? How do they view us in the first place? Now, I think about this for a second. 1979, when I was inspired by this young man, bin Laden, and the Mujahideen, when I began to see what they're doing, I'm like, wow, I want to go fight with these people. And then they kept saying, hey, at the end of the 80s, we defeated one of the great Satans of the world, the Soviets. Well, guess what they're going to be doing now? They defeated the second one, So they're appearing in the eyes of these young jihadis who are being inspired by them like these are the heroes. You see, Allah is on their side. Theologically, they are being basically bumped up right now. I mean, that's why people are concerned. They think like they're going to take over the world and stuff. No, they're not going to take over the world. But the problem is they're going to create problems. It's a hotbed now for people to go and start fighting, who's going to be in control. And along the way, there'll come groups that probably will take advantage of that. And who knows what's next.
Well, you do have a group that's already a thorn in their side and known as the IS/K, which is the IS/Khorasan. The Khorasan is the larger, is if you look at the ancient Khorasan, that included all of what is today Afghanistan and parts of northern Pakistan, and they would like to get that whole land back. They would like to get it under one hegemony. The Taliban would be the best. Now, the problem is the ISK they have split from the Taliban. They split in 2015 for that very reason, because they didn't feel that the Taliban were going far enough, that they were not using Islamic criteria. They were not strong enough, and they believed that they were not radical enough. And so they split with the Taliban. They're in Pakistan, and then they moved up into just south of where is today Jalalabad, and they started their training camps. Now, that is the group that blew up 170 people on Thursday. That was one of their men that blew that up, and they took credit for it, and the Americans retaliated and blew up a car and said that these were two of the planners. How they knew that they were planners, no one, it didn't matter. That was basically the White House saying that. The White House just blew up a car and showed pictures of the blown up car and said, now, these were the planners. Look what happened just yesterday when they sent another drone to blow up another car right outside the airport and turned into a family of 10, 7 of whom were children. So now that's an egg in our face. If we can't distinguish between one car and another, then we're pretty hopeless. So I think this is desperation. The White House is trying to find any way of avenging those 13 soldiers that were killed on Thursday. And I think from here on out, I would be very distrustful of anything America says about what they when it comes to Afghanistan. We don't have any kind of intelligence. If we couldn't even understand who these 300,000 were and why they just took off their uniforms, if we can't understand that, then how are we going to understand who the ISK are or even what their agenda is? And the ISK are bothersome, and Al-Qaeda are coming back, and these groups will start to form. I would be a little careful, though, to say that they're going to take over the Taliban. I think the Taliban have been once burned. They got burned by Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda went and attacked the United States with those 19 young men and those 4 jets. And that's why America came and destroyed the Taliban there in Afghanistan and forced them into the south, into Pakistan. So I would be careful to say that the ISK is now going to take over, because I think the fact that the Taliban were so successful in just 10 days, destroying a force of 300,000 without even hardly firing a shot, and starting in the north. They didn't start in the Pashtun area. They did not start in Kandahar. They started up in the north amongst the Uzbeks, and they moved off to the east amongst the Tajiks, and then they came down and took Herat, and then they took Kandahar, and then at the very end they took Jalalabad, and then of course Kabul. Well, that was strategic. They did that to show that they control the north. The people that aren't even their people, they control them just out of fear and also out of allegiance. And that's why the 300,000 just gave up their weapons, gave up their uniforms, walked out of their bases, and gave them as we're finding out, the Chinooks and also the Blackhawks, and of course the 375,000 guns. They just handed them the guns. That's why, and you notice, and I noticed this the very first day, as soon as those Taliban went into the presidential palace, look at that famous picture of them standing around that desk. They look kind of ill at ease. They don't know what to say. They didn't know where to look. And what were they all holding? They were all holding M16s, not AK-47s. They were all holding M16s. And then, of course, they have this great new group called the Badri 313 group. Have you heard about the Badri 313?
Well, the Badri 313, apparently they're special forces.
They're special forces. They're called Badri because of the Battle of Badr on March the 13th. So March is the 3rd month. So they're even using Western months. They're using Western nomenclature to define themselves. Isn't that ironic? So Badri from the Battle of Badr in 624, and then March the 13th. They are all, if you look at the video that just came out yesterday, there's a video of them standing on one of these beautiful trucks, these beautiful Humvees, brand new, not a scratch on it. And they're all standing at attention with ill-fitting uniforms and head cover helmets and even night goggles on in the middle of the day, holding these M16s. And they're also, some of them are holding what they call I want to get the right name. They're holding the M4s, which are more assault rifle firefighters. And they're holding them, standing at attention. And there is the Indian reporter saying, "This is the elite. These are the elite. And look at that. They have American weapons and they have American uniforms." And I said, "Yes, they do. Where do you think they got them from? From the other Afghanis." He said they got them from the Americans. No, they didn't get them from the Americans. They got them from the Afghani soldiers. And I said, I said, after about a year, they're going to have to redo. They're going to have to find ammunition from somewhere. They're going to have to also find spare parts from somewhere. And once you use only American material, you're then dependent on that American material. What do you think is going to happen? I think you are correct. They're going to probably sell it all and use it for finances because they need finances. They don't have finances. But there is something waiting in the wings. And we can talk about this next if you want to.
Yeah. Because I want to know what's waiting in the wings and what should we expect.
Well, to understand what's waiting in the wings, you need to ask who are the one people that didn't leave. What's the one group of Europeans that stayed behind? There were no jets, there was no peoples, and one embassy has remained open the entire time. The Russian embassy. Have you heard anybody talk about this yet, Al-Fadi?
No, I mean, Russia and China, to be honest with you, are the two that are
there in Qatar, actually in Qatar and Doha, who were meeting the Taliban officials, the Chinese. So why in the world were the Russians not part of this evacuation? And why are the Chinese meeting the Taliban leaders in Doha, up there in Qatar? To me, I see the writing on the wall. These are the new caretakers. These are the new money lenders. These are now where the new equipment's going to come from. And therefore, all that American equipment may last for a while, but only for a while. Almost everything is going to go Russian from here on out. And I'm just hoping and I'm praying that the Russians will also be able to feed the starving Afghanis who are going to be caught up in this humanitarian crisis that's going to start in about a month. I'm hoping that that's going to happen. We'll see.
Unfortunately, exactly. So, I mean, brother, what do you expect is going to happen moving forward in Afghanistan? Do you think the Taliban will become at least the governing force, despite the fact that there'll be some scrimmages with the ISK and with other groups, or do you think they're going to end up fighting with each other for control?
I think both. And this is the $1 million question that no one really knows how to answer. It's obvious that Taliban certainly do control the rural area, but do they control the cities? And that's going to be seen. We don't know if they're going to be able to control the cities, because in order to control the cities, you need to have expertise. You need to have urbanization. You need to have urban experts, and you need to be able to run companies. The Taliban don't have any of those skills, so they're going to have to use someone else who has those skills, and that's where they're probably going to bring in Russians and lots of Chinese. I assume the Chinese will fill in that gap, that vacuum. If that is the case, all we're showing is there's another group that's now coming in to take the place of where the Americans have left, and the Europeans as well. And so we're just seeing a shift of duty. And for most Americans, they're quite happy to see this scenario. I don't see anybody that would be unhappy with that, other than the humanitarian, the aid experts, and the doctors and the nurses, and also some of your liberals who would like to see all those gains of all those freedoms that were gained by those people, especially by the women lawyers. But they've all gone. They've all left. They've all come to the United States. So they're going to have a nice life here in the United States. And I think most of them will take advantage of that. I mean, 123,000 of them came to America, just America. I know upwards of 10,000. They're saying as many as could be 20,000 will go to United Kingdom. So I think in Europe, all these Afghanis who benefited from the largesse of the last 20 years, they will be well taken care of. and I'm sure most everybody in our countries will welcome them with open arms, and they will live a fruitful life. I don't see any of them going back to Afghanistan. Now, I may be wrong because I don't see anything in Afghanistan for them to go back to. They have been given a taste of Western mores, Western freedoms. They have nothing to give the world. Afghanistan, this is now. Afghanistan have no oil. They have no products. They really have, really, they are an they are living in the 7th and 8th century, and some of them may be living even earlier than that. And I remember when I was in Afghanistan, when I left as a high schooler, I went to Afghanistan. I went to Kabul, and I remember this is long before the Soviets. This is in the 1970s, and I remember just thinking I'd stepped back about 6 centuries. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. You know, there were gunsmiths. There were these stores that had flintlocks still in it. Flintlocks. I couldn't believe that I was seeing flintlocks, and Afghanistan really has not really cared to move on beyond that. They have been forced to move on much quicker because of the foreigners who've come in and taken over, like the Russians and, of course, the Americans. And it's the Americans who have foisted that onto the Afghani people living in the cities. That is 20% of the Afghani population of 38 million. So you're talking about a few million who now have tasted that and will never be able to go back to that. And that's unfortunate. The other thing I worry about is the church in Afghanistan. You have probably been hearing that the Afghanistan has had the second fastest growing church in the world. That is not true. Those statistics have to be debunked very quickly. I don't know if you've heard these reports coming out in the last 2 weeks.
I did not hear about being the second largest, but I heard about some Afghanis did embrace
Not the largest,
Christianity.
second fastest.
No,
Second fastest after Iran. Now, Iran, that is true. The Iranian church is the fastest growing, and they are always saying that the Taliban were the second fastest. It turns out, from what we're finding out, is that these had to do with Americans living in Afghanistan and Europeans who came over as NGOs, who came over as doctors, nurses, you name it. They came as Christians. They wrote in their identity cards Christians, and that bumped up the figures. They've all left in 2 weeks. Everybody's left. So now that has imploded on itself. Nonetheless, there is a fledgling church. It's very much underground. We do know that the pastors there in Afghanistan in the last 2 weeks have been giving messages out. You may have seen some of them. They've come across to me, and they're asking for prayer. They're not asking for aid. They don't want aid, and they do not want to be identified because they're having to move. In one case, there's a pastor who, I won't give you the name of the city, but he's in one of the cities who has been moving from house to house to house to house because every house he goes to, the neighbors finger him to the Taliban, which says something about this idea of revenge, that they are seeing Christians as part of the problem. What is rather sad to hear is that the Taliban have their names. They have the names of all the pastors. Where did they get those names from? And this is one of the difficulties that we need to pray about. We as a church need to ask for protection for these pastors. They are very brave. I don't know of one of them that wanted to leave. They all said they wanted to stay because they wanted to stay with their parishioners. They only have small groups. These are house churches, and they do not at all believe that running away would solve the problem. Interestingly, almost all your secular Taliban Afghanis did run away. Did you notice that? They were the ones that were all running to the airplanes.
Right.
The Christian pastors refused to leave, and that is quite a testimony to me, because they knew that they will be targeted. They knew their names have been given to the Taliban, and the Taliban will kill them once they catch them. The other group that we need to pray for are the women. They are asking for any names of any women that are under the age of 25. I'm sorry, over the age of 15. Sorry, not under the age. It is under the age of 20, but over the age of 15, so that they can be used as basically sex slaves and wives for the Taliban, for the fighters. So, I mean, there's going to be a huge amount of disruption. We're going to see that. I've seen pictures from Herat today, and you can look at it's a ghost town. No one's working. All the jobs have been shut down. Women have been sent home. Schools are not working. Now, in Kabul, they are. And what they're showing us from Kabul, they still are on the streets, not women, but there are people on the streets, and the jobs still seem to be going, and schools are still in session. How long that will happen, we don't know. And I don't think we will hear much more from here on out, because where are the journalists? What journalists have remained? And how can we know whether or not what
You
they're
know,
telling us is packaged or not?
to be honest with you, Jay, I don't even believe a word the journalists say, especially our journalists. Sadly, it just everyone creates their own narrative, and you don't even know anymore who's telling you what and what is the truth. And there's a lot of exaggeration in the last 2 weeks. People been sending me messages saying that the Taliban have named 225 people and they issued a verdict to execute them tomorrow morning. Come to find out, this is an old news and has nothing to do with this event. So people sometimes are quick to judge and not careful to vet any piece of news, and they spread, or they at least help spread fear and make people make unwise decisions sometimes as a result of this.
Yeah, if you looked at and there are videos coming out quite almost daily now and hourly, this today, especially because now was the last day. They were taking videos of everybody and everything. You saw them as they walked into the air base there at the Karzai International Airport, and they just kind of looked around at them. They were gobsmacked by what they found. And you can see them. They just look like kids. And it was interesting to me also that the Taliban had roadblocks all the way up to the airport, but they also were allowing American soldiers to come through the roadblocks as American soldiers went to get people. They went to get people that could not get past the crowds, and they were not stopping the American soldiers from doing so. There, when they were processing, they're at the gate where the bomb went off. There were Taliban right there with the American soldiers, making sure that people could get through. So you have to give credit to the Taliban, at least up till now. They have been decent. They have not. They have foiled 5 different bomb attacks in the last 2 weeks from going off, and all by ISK. And it was the one that got through, the one that did go off on Thursday. 3 of the Taliban were wounded in that one, proving that they were really wanted to keep their word. They really did want the Americans to leave, and they wanted them to get out. They certainly did want them to get out. They did not want them to let go beyond August 31st. Obviously, they got out a day even earlier, which says something about the fact that they left 6,000 behind. They were so quick to get out; they didn't even stop to get those who yet could still have been saved. So I'm hopeful that the Taliban will keep their word. They have kept their word for the last 2 weeks. They didn't turn on any of the Americans, and the only gunshots you saw after the Americans left were those that they're firing into the air as they're firing tracer bullets in celebration that the Americans had left, that now Afghanistan was back in their hands. I don't think we're going to hear too much news anymore. Most Americans are going to turn off to Afghanistan. I would imagine most of the Europeans are. And that saddens me, because after 20 years of such investment, including your son, you don't just turn around and walk away from a country that you've invested that much into. $2 trillion, 2,400 lives, and 20 years of investment. How can we just turn our backs and say that we don't care anymore? But I think that's what Americans are probably saying. And I think that's one reason why all the presidents from the time of Obama and Trump and Biden have wanted to get out of Afghanistan. How we did it, however, is absolutely tragic. And
Yes.
you're correct. We got licked, and we ran with our legs between our tails.
Unfortunately, brother, and the thing is, I want to add, you have an honor and shame type of a culture where they are feeling honored now that they have eliminated what they perceive to have been the problem. And at the same time, it's a culture where revenge becomes necessary to restore honor, which means there'll be casualties. And a lot of the time, it's innocent people that will pay the price on account of this.
Some people have been emailing me today and have been sending me texts, and one of the things they're saying is, what about the Afghanis who have left and have come to the States? Should we not talk to them? I flew in from Central America on Saturday. I flew into Dulles Airport. I understand that there had been a real backlog of airplanes coming into Dulles on Wednesday and Thursday. Some of the planes were even sitting on the tarmacs with refugees inside up to 12 hours. Because there was such a backlog of planes coming into Dulles Airport. Dulles Airport, for those of you who don't know, is Washington, D.C. airport. That's the airport I use whenever I fly out overseas. And so I flew into Dulles Airport, and I was fascinated because I saw quite a few Afghani refugees there in the airport. And they looked bewildered. You could see they just came with the shoes on. Some of them were missing a shoe, or didn't, or one or two of them were even barefooted. And they came in families, and I could see families, and they all had the traditional dress on, and they were looking all around, bewildered. And they all had tapes on their hands, different colored tapes with designating different things. With every family, there were two policemen, two Washington policemen, and they would walk with them and tell them where they go to the next place, the next place, and the next place. And I looked at them, and some of them were walking right past me. We were there in the luggage hall. They were walking right past me, and I just looked at their eyes. And I looked at them, and I could see that most of them were villagers. Now, a lot of them, they looked like they had never left Afghanistan probably in their lives before. And I was almost going to stop. Of course, we wouldn't have been able to communicate. But for any Afghanis who have come to the United States or have come to Europe to now live a different life, I would ask that you understand Americans, though we haven't understood you, and that you understand what kind of ethos we have here in America, that we do live by Judeo-Christian principles. We do not live by Islamic principles at all. I think that's pretty obvious, that we do not care for Islamic principles, and we certainly do not live for the Hanafi rules. And the fact that all these Afghans, and I'm talking, if there's any Afghans who are listening, these Afghans have left and have fled in their tens of thousands. Look at the borders right now. There are hundreds of thousands. 123,000 have come to the United States alone. They have come because they do not want to live under Islamic law. They don't want to live under Taliban law or the Pashtunwali law. If that is the case, then remember that when you come to the States, that we do have freedoms here that you don't have in Afghanistan. Otherwise, you wouldn't have left everything behind. And now that you've come here, don't try to recreate your laws again. Don't try to bring Islam back to the United States, because this is what's fascinating to me. How many people leave Muslim countries, come to the West, and they don't go to Muslim countries? Have you noticed? I don't see anybody going to Saudi Arabia. I don't see them going to Jordan. I don't see them going to Dubai. I don't see them coming to Pakistan, except for those who are at the border who want to go to Pakistan on their way to other countries. Why is it they always want to come to the West and they always want to come to America when there are plenty of other Muslim countries that they could go to if they really are Muslims? Is there something about America that's unique? Is there something about America that's attractive? And I would say there is. We have a lot of freedoms here that they just don't have in the Muslim world. That's why all the immigration is coming our direction. We have an awful lot of good economic possibilities that they just don't have in the Muslim world. I don't know of any Muslim country that's economically stable except the oil-rich countries, which has nothing to do with Islam. Let me repeat that. The oil-rich countries are rich because of the oil which comes from the earth. That had nothing to do with Islam and nothing to do with their own abilities. In fact, almost all the engineering and almost all the excavating and also the refining has come from the West. All that technology has been given them. So if people are coming to the West, I would ask that they honor what we are, who we are, and why we are so successful and their countries are not. There's something about the West. Al-Fadi, you've come to the West. Yeah, you came and took an engineering degree here. And then you saw something here that was unique, and that is the freedoms that we have. The freedoms of mobility, the freedoms of expression, the freedoms of criticism, the freedom to change your mind, and yes, the freedom to change your religion. And these freedoms are all found in the Bible. They all come not from this book, folks. They all come from this book. This is the book that all those freedoms can be found. And that's why we call it Judeo-Christian. It's both the old and especially the new, where you find criticism. Who do you think was criticizing Jesus? Jesus allowed himself to be criticized. Jesus permitted people to even mock him, to spit upon him. Yes, to even crucify him. And how did Jesus respond when he was crucified? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that is the backbone, that's the foundation of our culture. As much as atheists hate me to say that, and the humanists are going to gnarl their teeth when they hear me say that, that is exactly what makes America great. It's because, and I didn't mean to put a Trumpism in there. I'm not supporting Trump. I'm supporting why America is special, why even Europe is special. Why is it that Western nations that follow Judeo-Christian principles have something going for them that the Muslim world does not? Why is it our laws are so much free? Where do you think this equality comes from? What did Jesus do with women? Look at Galatians 3, verse 28. There is no difference between man or woman, Jew or Greek, slave or free. All are equal in Jesus Christ. Take a look at marriage and see what kind of marriage principles we find. We follow biblical marriage. We follow biblical principles. We follow biblical morality. As much as some of you are going to hate what I say here, you've got to listen to me. There is something unique about America and our foundations. And I don't want to see those mocked at or scoffed at by the Muslims who are coming, by the Afghanis who are coming, or trying to confront it and say, let's then recreate an Islamic environment here in America. If you have fled the Islam, why are you bringing it with you? If you have fled what the Taliban have done to women, then why is it you want to introduce that in our country? There are freedoms here that have taken thousands of years to fulfill. And it's those freedoms that I hope that not just the Afghani, but any Muslims that come to our shores, that they will enjoy, that they will participate in, that they will assimilate it, and that they will choose to be their own. Because, listen, folks, there's nothing better than the person of Jesus Christ and the gospel he gives. There's not a better freedom or a better person or a better model. I don't know of anybody that can come close to Jesus Christ as a model for not just today, but for every day, not just for here, but even for Afghanistan. And I would hope, and I would really hope that all of you who are watching this show, who have watched what Al-Fadi and I have done, we've said this for years, haven't we, Al-Fadi? We have always come back to the gospel. And we have always said that is the foundation. That must be what people come to, and that must be what people choose. It is a choice. You're not forced it. We don't have officers or our military with guns in our hands forcing you to accept our way of life or accept our morals or even our beliefs. That is something that you can choose to do for yourself, because Jesus gives you that choice. Everybody has that choice to accept him or to reject him. We can't force that choice on you. But I hope you do enjoy our freedoms, and I hope you do enjoy our Christian ideals. I have make no apologies for that. And probably that's the best way to end this show.
Amen, brother. Amen. As always, thank you so much. And just to let everybody know, Dr. J will be one of the teachers at our online conference that will be held between October 14th and October 16th. And I'll be doing promos about it. And hopefully I'll bring Jay to talk briefly about his lessons. But hopefully many of you can join us, and you can check the registration information on my Facebook page, and I will begin to do YouTube also videos to help people begin to the process of registration. Thank you, brother, as always. We appreciate you, appreciate the knowledge, and also the background information that you have shared with us today. I'm sure it was beneficial to a lot of people who are watching, because we need to put things in perspective and we need to understand the full picture, not just take pieces here and there, and unfortunately we can paint a completely different image than the image that is unfolding, or at least that will be shaping up. Last word.
Well, I think you've wrapped it up all in one nutshell. We are seeing a history unfold in front of us today. We're seeing a whole new chapter for Afghanistan, for the Afghani people. This is not what many of them wanted. Most of them probably did not want it. But now that it has happened, it's behind us. Let's don't forget it, and let's make sure that we welcome the Afghanis who are here. And for those of us who are Christians, we need to continue to pray for our church in Afghanistan. Continue to pray for the pastors, for the believers. They are going to be found out. They will be executed, and we just pray that the Lord will protect them. And when it comes their time, that he will bring them home. Amen. Because that's where we're all going at one time or another. And in some ways, I can't wait to get there.
And the Bible tells us that they have defeated Satan by their blood and by the testimony, and their testimony basically, and basically the blood of the Lamb. That's the blood that will defeat Satan over and over again. Well, thank you, brother. Thank you, everyone. And hope to see you again in the next live stream sometimes this week, Lord willing. Take care. Bye-bye.